Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell, going to be your host here tonight, and my co-host tonight is going to be Dr. Jeff Elliott. Jeff, say hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Yep, thank you. And Jeff, tell us just real quick a little bit about yourself.
So Jeff Elliott, Amarillo, Texas, provide tech support for Biochem throughout the United States.
Yep. And color commentator is Dr. Tom Overton. Tom?
Yeah,
good
Scott,
to see you.
thanks for having me again. Tom Overton, Cornell University. I do research, teaching, extension work there in
Yeah,
dairy.
perfect. Thanks for joining us again. And we have two special guests, Dr. Jim Tully and Dr. Jason Brixey. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll start with you, Jim. I've known you the longest. It's been quite a while. I know you as a tough customer. I tried selling stuff to you for several years, but you've always been fair. So I appreciate you. Would you mind kind of introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about your new company?
Jim Tully. I do dairy nutrition consulting in California. I live in Minnesota. Married into a dairy family. Became a farmer, but still do consulting. Was presented with an opportunity early this year, late last year, to become fully independent, allow myself to really answer clients' questions with no encumbrance, no bias. It's not the right word. It's really not a bias, but left a company and now do it for myself. So I'm really am working for my clients.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. And this young man over here is your partner?
No, I'm not going to let that happen. Ain't no way.
My competition.
Yeah.
You obviously know each other very well then. Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so Jim and I actually used to work for the same company, and about a month after he left the company, I followed and was able to go completely independent. And I've been an independent consultant in the dairy industry for 20 years, and I have 23 years experience as a nutrition consultant, and just excited about the new path that God's laid out for me, to be honest with you. And I'm in the California area, Pacific Northwest, pretty heavy, and so traveling a bunch, but having a lot of fun. Having a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, good for you. Rooting for you.
Thanks.
We've got you guys here today. We're going to be reviewing or at least start reviewing a presentation that was given by Dr. Rick Grant. He was unable to attend, so we're going to stand in for him. That title of his presentation was "Don't Let Overcrowding Wreck Your Ration." So it's kind of a compelling title. Jim, would you mind kind of walking us into some of the key elements that was discussed during that presentation?
Yeah. I can't reiterate the whole presentation, but I've heard Rick talk. I've known Rick for a few years. Something that the way he described it yesterday was very helpful for me. Crowding under almost every operation we work with happens at some point. So he's describing it, it's like a subclinical presence that's always there. You throw enough people at it, enough resources, and a dairy can do very well. But if something happens to come in, a disease, the highly pathogenic avian influenza, or heat stress, if something else comes in, it's really going to tip it over.
And it will,
Undercrowd.
right?
Yes. So that's, like I said, I've heard Rick talk, and there's crowding for stalls, what about headlocks and all of those things, but I think when my clients hear it that way, that you can crowd, but it's a stressor, and something else can really tip it over the edge.
So generally speaking, how do we define overcrowding, and is it different by farm?
What I'm hearing is beds are vitally important for how Rick is viewing the cow's time budget, that a term he came up with Marine out of Canada. What's their time budget? If they're laying down, chewing their cud, that's really what she wants to do. So if she doesn't have a bed due to crowding, she's probably not doing exactly what she wants to do. in the 24-hour period.
And probably not being as efficient as she can be.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it.
So, Scott, one thing I want to add, because you mentioned this and I forgot he had said it, subclinical overcrowding. And just think about all the time we've been in the industry. It was subclinical milk fever. Then it was subclinical ketosis. And he brought that up, and I thought it was quite interesting that it may be there. You may not see the effects of it until there's almost like a co-infection. Something else happens, and then the issue of that even slight overcrowding might blow up.
But with the other subclinicals, whether it's subclinical ketosis, subclinical milk fever, there's still a cost to it, and you're not seeing it. Is the same true of subclinical overcrowding? There's a cost to it, even though you're not seeing it, even though there's not a big stress?
Well, when you go through the time budget, right? I mean, you go back to his earlier work with Ben Kaiserlink, and that's part of what I get to do actually on farm a lot. Is it's very practical information, right? And part of what I do on farm is those time budgets and counting stalls, counting headlocks. I mean, I think about even areas that maybe you wouldn't think of overcrowding. Like we take our animals to the holding pen in the milk barn. They're crowded. It's just part of their daily life, but how long are they staying in there, right? You know, from the time the very first cow walks in to the very cow walks out, what's that time frame worth? And then we're taking it away from her lying time. At the end of the day, all we're doing is we're trying to manage stress, right? Like that's how I look at it, big picture.
Yes, and we're going to do those things. It's a dairy. They have to operate. So it's how fast, how efficient can you get out of that stressful position?
Yeah. And how do you do that?
I was talking with Rick after the presentation, and I said, I view it as, maybe this will answer it or maybe not, Scott. Good people can make a bad facility work. Bad people cannot work in a good facility. And he said he agreed. It's people get a lot of this done. Intensity, passion for the cow, wanting to make sure, hey, I have to milk them, but I only want her out of the pen for 45 minutes. Or we talked a lot about lockups and stuff in that time budget. Okay, we're going to lock up cows. Well, come on, guys. We know a former manager, and he ran the dairy on the clock, and if he went by a pen and the cows were locked, he'd turn them loose. Breeders were not happy. He said, you didn't get your done. I'm turning the cows loose. You have to figure out a way to get your job done. The cows need loose. So people can overcome some of that.
Well, and it's the awareness. I mean, I'm into a fairly new market in the last couple years, and I keep running across this same issue, and a lot of folks don't even know like how crowded they are, or specifically I'm crowded in the wrong area. I should be undercrowding my fresh cows and I have breeding pens and overcrowding the low cows, but they haven't even thought through that process yet. So it's a matter of like bringing it to the attention. Okay, here it is. Here's the stressor, right? Now, what can we do about it? The limiting factor in a lot of cases is the facility itself. Like what can and what can we not do with what you have?
Yeah. Jason, thanks, because you asked what can they do. Facilities will always win. I've just, my observations are back to the people, but eventually the facility wins. That becomes a big impact. And crowd up the late pen. Don't do every pen's 10% over. Okay, don't do that. Get them out of the fresh pen. Be under in there, and 12% elsewhere. And then if your holding pen will hold it, 20% in that low, dry-off, tail-end pen is a tolerable spot to do it.
Well, and I just keep thinking about like the Southwest or the West, where heat abatement is a huge topic all the time, every year. And then this time of year, what do we see, right? We see the waves of dry cows, fresh cows come through, and then it evaporates. There's not this consistent, fresh cow number every single month. So it's preparing for those waves, right? It's like, the facility is designed for X amount of freshenings, right? But we weren't designed for our reproductive failure in August and September that caused, a huge wave 9 months later. So
Yeah. Oh, they have to be in the close-up pen for 3 weeks. They have to be there. Maybe this time you cut it to 18, and that's a big relief on that. And the fresh pen, they're always there 14 days, have to be in there 14 days. Well, maybe right now it's 11 days.
Well, yeah, coming full circle, I mean, we're trying to manage stress, right? So we're always dealing with the lesser of two evils. What is this stress worse than this stress?
Yeah. Let me summarize real quick what I think I'm hearing. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys do these time cards. You're identifying maybe where there's some problems. Your next step is then a conversation with the dairy farmer, the herdsman, and that's where you identify and lay out and then work with them to put a plan together and maybe saying, hey, here's something that might be coming down the road. Here's a problem, and here's some solutions, and you talk through it.
Yeah,
Is
the
that-
options. You discuss options.
The economics of feeding Reassure precision release choline. Reassure is fed during the transition period, and because it's fed for such a short period of time, it costs just $15 per cow. And yet the benefits will continue to generate income throughout the year. Cows fed Reassure produce 5 pounds more colostrum, which pays for your Reassure investment on the very first day of lactation. Cows fed Reassure also produce 5 pounds more milk per day, every day. That means after the first day, every day is payday. Invest in Reassure during the transition period and recoup your investment on the very first day of lactation. After that, you got it, payday.
Now Rick's got some numbers for us to play with, because for the first 15 years it was, my visits were, we got to do a better job with freestall maintenance, cow comfort, and people got kind of sick of listening to it because they're like, well, is it going to pay? Is my extra labor and effort going to pay off? And now we actually have those numbers to say, yes, it's worth hypothetically X, Y, Z, because more lying time, more rumination, more milk, fat, et cetera, et cetera. So we have that data now.
I think you guys make a great point, right? Both Jim and Jason. I mean, again, how you talk with your clients, your farms about, how do I best manage my facilities that I have, and if it means giving up a little bit of time in certain pens, to keep the stocking density, appropriate, that all makes a lot of sense, right? And so, and so that means it's going to be dynamic, right? And I also wonder, Scott, back to the overcrowding thing in general, right? I mean, we're talking about resting time and things like that, and bed availability, and maybe that's an established lactation thing. I kind of veer toward feed bunk space for transition cows, right? And look at it more that way. I mean, yes, I got to have a bed, but, boy, those are animals who really want to have access to feed, and as much as they want and whenever they want it. And because I think we all know we get them off to a better start, then everything else gets easier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to go back to something Jason said. You said you've been in a new
Oh,
market.
boy.
Yeah, last night. Yeah. Okay. Okay, fancy pants. Okay. So you said you're in a new marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Is the perception of overcrowding different between the dairymen in one area versus the other?
Absolutely. Yes, it is. Yep. It's something that's just what we do. That's what we do here.
And how'd that happen?
How did it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's almost cultural.
Well, yeah, I think so. And I just had this thought that we almost need another podcast, and it should be titled, How Do We Dairy in 2025 in a 1965 facility? Right? How do you take what we know today, right, and run it through what we knew back then on a facility? Like, no one's just going to open up their checkbook and, we're going to rebuild a $25 million dairy with things that we know today, right?
So if that habit becomes normal in that area, are they not aware of the implications of that overcrowding?
Just recently, I did have a client that was in the same scenario, and we have convinced him, hey, look, I think you need to go from 3 times a day milking back to 2 times a day milking. It's like, whoa, what? Like, that goes against everything that, we ever thought about, economics and et cetera, et cetera. And again, it's like, the stress that we have on this herd is so great that, you know, we can't make the diet dense enough. We can't get enough intake into them. They're lying down for 9 hours a day, barely getting the job done. The barn is sometimes on time, sometimes not on time. We went to 2X, and we're up 2.5 pounds of milk. And he's like, man, I think I'm making like $1.50 or 100 just right off the bat.
Because 3X isn't a stress, but if it's everything's underpinned with stuff, and you can't get the work done.
Yeah, it's
exactly
the
as
rubber
you said
bands,
it.
right?
I'm done. Cows will try to the very end, but eventually they can't lie. They're just going to say, yeah, I'm done. You gave me all the resources. This is what you get.
You know, kind of back to Jeff's question, do they know? Well, maybe not, right? Because it's subclinical. Back to the whole subclinical conversation we had. It's not obvious, right? Because it's happening in such little increments. So, yeah, maybe kind of like the proverbial frog in the warm bath. Gradually turn up the heat. Yeah.
It doesn't know it's getting cooked.
Yeah, exactly.
I liked what Rick Grant said at the very end. You know, the cow doesn't really care that she's overcrowded. All she cares about is, do I have a bed that I don't have to fight for? You know, do I have room at the feed bunk that I don't have to fight for? As long as those things are available to me, I could care less.
That's right. That's a good takeaway from that, and keep that in mind. And very often we find they don't have the bed type stuff, and that's going to be a stress. Is it kind of back to one of your early points, Scott? What's the impact of that? Well, it's negative, right? We know that, and we can do back kind of the title of it. We can do some things in a diet, but the way Jason and I build our diets, there's certain things that, no, you can't violate that. Oh, but I got to get more milk. You know, it's like, okay, don't do it this way. You know, I've got as much fat, as much carbohydrates. I'd love to get some more soluble fiber, but your diet's never perfect. But these rules are kind of need to be followed.
Yeah, that's kind of a nice segue. So, how does overcrowding wreck your ration? Can you give us some examples of that?
Let me get this thought out for a second. Back to, because I've heard you coin this a lot. Like there's just rules, right? And if you break the rules, there's consequences. And I think you just, as long as you know that, right? How I kind of view where you're going to lead in right now is, I have a few clients that are very successful at overcrowding some of their pens, right? And I think the way they get away with it is everything else is perfect. You know, their milk barn is oversized. They're able to get those pens of 250 cows out in less than 45 minutes, and that's like the first cow in, last cow out. So, travel time on time on concrete. You know, how much time on concrete are they? You know, the standing time. There's no lockups. When the pen goes out, the freestall filler is in. They're groomed. They've got sand bedding, the heat abatement. I mean, fans, soakers, the whole 9 yards. They get away with it because everything else is perfect. Like they've taken all the other stressors away, but the one stress they do have is the overcrowding. So they're able to make it work. And then leading into the diet, the feed bunk side of things, the nutrition management side of things is, I don't think there's room and there's a huge opportunity for error when we feed the slick bunks in overcrowded situations. I think it's that much more important that we're shooting for orts or refusals at that point. And then we can get into what we're going to do with that. But a cow, especially those higher producing type animals, should not have to be looking for the next bite, in my opinion.
I just wrote a quick note. You and I talked yesterday, I think, or I don't think it was last night. Measures of efficiency, and there's, well, is it milk per cow? I got to be 100 pounds per cow. Okay, if that's your goal, we'll try and work and set some things up. Or is it milk per freestall? Can I crowd up that pen and get more milk out of each? Or is it milk per parlor stall? Or is it milk per pen? And I think and then last night we did argue a little bit about, well, what is the economic impact? And I know there's ways to measure that, to look at it, but I think every operation views it differently. And economists may think that that's crazy talk. I didn't spend the night at Holiday Inn Express last night. But I don't know if we can make one size fits all that dairymen need to do this. That's
So
just
the
what I
answer
look at.
is it depends on
Ah,
which
there you
measurements,
go,
right?
there
yeah.
you go.
Okay.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I can understand why it's something that they end up, doing over time because it makes the balance sheet look better, right? The value is in the cow, the asset is the cow, and the more assets I have, then it makes my balance sheet look better, and that's what the bank wants to see,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, it's economics and in science, and they don't really care about each other a lot.
Yes. Yeah. And in that, back to Jeff's, is there a geographical difference? I think so. You get east in the country, not all, but most herds crowd, like to a number of 20% over.
Tom, what do you see in the?
At least.
Right.
And it depends on the group, right, Jim? But I mean, boy, we push them down in transition, and then it's not uncommon in my world to still see 30% over stalls in a six row barn. That's not unusual.
And I know some of those herds that you've been on too, they can get really good, phenomenal milk per cow. What are you seeing in that New York area that maybe we can have the California guys adopt?
Yeah, and I'm not advocating here for more crowding here, because I do think there's an impact.
But it's an asset,
right?
yes.
And I do think that, I mean, time and time again, you look at when you're talking about how it impacts the ration, right, or the diet. Well, of course, overcrowded cows eat slug feed, right? They eat at a faster rate. That's been shown time and time and time again. It affects the rumen. It's got to affect the rumen. There's some work out of Minor. So, Melissa Woolpert, Melissa Caribou now was at Minor doing her grad work there. She did field study work on fatty acid profiles. So, I think we got these de novo mixed preformed fatty acids out there. Adam talked about these this week. De novo kind of crudely reflect rumen efficiency, rumen function. And in all these commercial farms, she looked at all kinds of dietary factors and other things like that. In the two big studies she did, herds are overstocked, had lower components, had lower de novo, likely driven by lower de novo fatty acids, likely driven by poor rumen efficiency, right? So it's interesting how it carried through strongly, probably stronger than any other factor she looked at in those data sets.
So is there anything you can do to the ration? Let's say, is there an overcrowding ration?
I'm going to take notes on that.
Yeah. Well, you're going to run a little more conservative probably, right, in terms of some of your hotter fractions of carbohydrates and things like that, just because you don't want to tip the herd over.
No, 100%. I mean, and I've had people tell me that too. It's like, well, that's great that I'm overcrowded, but it's not changing. So you're going to have to work with that. So that's what we do. We work with it.
And you're probably going to give up some milk, and there's got to be, and that they don't want that either, right? They want everything.
Yep.
Jason, is that common? I mean,
yeah, it's common. I mean, I always say I'm a rumenologist, not a nutritionist, right? So what matters to me the most is rumen health. Like at the end of the day, a healthy cow is the one who's going to give milk, right? A healthy cow is the one who's going to get pregnant. So performance and production is not always the first goal, on my list. It's cow health. It's the rumen's going to feed the cow, right? So my job is to feed the rumen.
Yeah, I had a dairyman. I wasn't there for the conversation, but a dairyman and a former consultant who's now retired. The owner was pushing on some stuff, and the consultant said, the only reason I'm here apparently is I'm the only one who advocates for the cow on this operation. It was all about business to him, but this consultant said, I'm the advocate for the cow.
it was kind of back to having cows as an asset and needing too many, to have those cows on the balance sheet, when in fact it may not, whether it's cash flow, whatever it is, we could show them that it's better to have lower stocking rates, if that is in fact, and I think the bankers do influence cow numbers a lot, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. I work with not many, but a couple that have that sort of a relationship where the banker can be an advisor, not just, a hammer. But I view it at a pretty high level because I don't want to get into their books on that angle. But every cow is an asset, and I don't know what they have today on their books. But if you're milking 1,000 cows, right, and each one's worth $1,500, there's a number on the balance at the bottom of the page. If you can do anything without tipping them over, right, and have 100 more units and things can flow good, the bank is going to like that. I don't know of any bank that's not going to like that number to have gone up. Milk production is cash flow, and they need that, right? So you have to do certain things to get that. So I'm not sure how a bank is going to come in and evaluate that. That I don't know. They're going to want high both, right? But there is trade-offs, and I think the science is getting better to more accurately predict the cow performance, and then milk price, all of the main factors on it. But I think we can talk to the clients. It's like, well, this is what I'm seeing, and you probably have this much detriment. Here's your negative factor. Then, your balance sheet and your income statement can reflect that.
It probably varies some by part of the country, lender, things like that too, I think, right? I mean, no doubt balance sheets are key with all this and things like that, but hopefully we get to the point where, and I think it's slowly getting there, where financial performance of the dairies are also being really factored in, right? So, and that's where some of these conversations can begin to enter in, right? So, given my assets and things like that, I mean, are we really getting the right financial performance out of this operation?
So I've been hearing, in the second time we've talked about on these podcasts, one of y'all mentioned it, milk per stall, and from an efficiency standpoint and whatnot. But is that milk per stall more from a banker perspective, and that those dairies are needing
return on capital kind of?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've usually heard it more, say, from the economists' side at meetings like this, presentations. If there's an economist on the panel or whatever, they'll talk about that as an efficiency measure. I don't know if the banks specifically have.
I'm not saying the banks would have specifically have, but it could have been derived from those conversations but yeah, just curious. I'm hearing more and more on that.
Tom, any other key takeaways from the presentation?
Yeah, again, I think, some of these things we've covered pretty well, I think, so far, right? Again, the time budget stuff that pay attention to, Jason, the different ways to consider stocking densities, things like that, and or overcrowding different parts of the lactation cycle, things like that. I mean, one thing was interesting, wasn't necessarily part of Rick's presentation, but not too long ago in the Northeast, when after COVID, our co-ops instituted these base programs, right, which weren't really quotas, but they kind of were quotas, right? And so, farms had to, the initial thing is we'll pay you full market value on 85% of your milk, and then you take your chances after that relative to whatever the excess milk it will bear. And we had farms at the time. And it was not like one farm did this, right? But I mean, farms would cull cows, and milk flow would not change.
Yep.
And so there were some farms that had to cull a pile of cows before they actually could get milk flow to really go down. And it's an interesting learning for us, at least thinking about my world, which is almost all confinement-based systems. Lots of 6-row. Barn configurations, occasionally some 4-row type of stuff, but those are interesting discussions to have. I'm not sure we learned as much from that maybe as we could, or our memory got short.
It didn't stick. Huh?
I don't know, but maybe you guys see something different.
Oh, right. Yeah, no. So 20 years ago, we had a processor in the Central Valley part of California that across the board, everybody had to reduce 25%, and you can't feed for that, right? And so everyone cut deep. And the more we cut, it's like the milk's not going away. What's happening? They have not forgot that, actually. Yeah, and so, but for that area, and we don't really see a lot of the overcrowding like I do in other parts of the West. But those guys have not forgot that.
Good.
Yeah.
And again, I think we know that, and you kind of alluded to this, right? That it's going to be a different factor for every dairy, right? And that's what makes this kind of tricky, right? Is you can't go across the board and say, okay, this level, here's the cliff, right? And and so that's what makes your jobs pretty challenging as you work with your clients and things like that to help them, figure out the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
The navigation of it.
I think it was like 1991, that old DHI Minnesota data that was put together on, cows leaving the herd in the first 90 days, right? And still to this day, if you look at it, it's the two big reasons is mastitis and lameness, and then the facilities that are overcrowded, it makes it even worse. And so lameness, like I go back to some of those rules that we can't break, maintenance trimming. I mean, I still, that is a huge conversation on a lot of very progressive dairies is, man, I'm seeing a lot of long feet still, and these cows have to travel. They're on their feet more on concrete because they're 30% overcrowded. Like, we can't let that get out of control.
That's really important, Jason. As you're asking the question, Scott, well, what can people do? Do the right things. Take care of the cow. Trimming feet is a perfect example of it. Especially on a 3X herd that's crowded type thing.
I think some of these answers are just too easy, to be honest with you. And so it's like, well, it can't be right. There's something you can do in the diet, right?
Can't you give me an additive that's really going to help that? So if I can, this will be me being on an opinion page.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Oh God.
Here we go.
There's maybe a psychological component to it or a reaction component to crowding. I've seen herds that are 2, 3, 4% overcrowded, which isn't overcrowded. That's probably a pretty good efficiency. I think maybe it was in Rick's talk that every pen you go into, there's always an empty stall, and there kind of is, unless it's 200% stocking. But there's always room, right? But those dairies that do that, the minute they go to 8% overcrowding, it becomes a disaster, right? Everything falls apart. We know of herds that'll be 25, 30% overcrowded. I work with one operation that just did another bump on crowding. Cows are doing better than ever. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I talked to the herdsman. He said, I think there's two things. We're long past the BST days, right? And he has really good people in the herdsman group that really care about the cows. They're doing all of those things. So now they're 35% overcrowded, and I'm pretty sure in their minds, well, we can go to 40. But my whole point on that is if you're going to crowd, go ahead and crowd, but have the resources there, because my observation, and here's the real opinion part, I think once you get to a 35% capacity, you have two herds in that pen. Somebody said you have the eaters and the liars lying down. So we know when a cow comes out from the pen, she really wants to eat, she really wants to drink. There's a segment of those fully crowded pens that don't have that. They know I'm a liar. They go get the bed. And they're going to just adapt to that. In 2, 3, 4 hours, when that cow's done eating, done walking around, this cow's going to get up and go to the bed or go to the feed bunk. And what I think I see is that hour and a half before going to the parlor is when you see the crowding. You'll see a lot of cows perching. The beds are full, and there will be a cow that really wishes she could lie down, but she can't. And then within an hour, they're going to go to the parlor. So I know it's not good. I know it's a negative, but I think that's how the cows adapt to it.
So one of the slides Rick showed, because I was going to bring this up, and he talked about the multifarious in relation to the first calf, and then that same slide he had sound legs versus ones with lameness. And it was almost a quadratic. You go up to 130% overcrowding, and that difference between sound and lame or older cows and young got big. But then when he got to 140%, I know it's not statistical or anything, but he showed it's almost like it was less, and maybe it is that two-herd mentality.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's right. I think there's actually some science that disputes it, which is fine, but that's just been my observation. I think that, because again, since it's my opinion, it's right.
You can say it right. It may not be right, but you can say
I like
it right.
that.
Yeah,
There you
okay.
go. I like that. I like that, Jeff. But my observation kind of fits that. Now I need to be careful to have that an unbiased look, but it's like there's two herds in this pen.
You know, I was kind of curious. We've had some conversations this week already about the lack of heifer supply, and I'm wondering if that's going to have a positive impact on crowding.
I thought of that about 15 minutes ago. I hadn't until then. I don't know.
Haven't seen it yet, though, huh?
Haven't seen it yet, right? But
Nope.
but it's,
Well,
you know, again, as the animals in the system, stuff like that, it's possible, right? But again, I think it's still, I mean, herds will still, you know, we're not going to see herds underpopulated, I don't think, right? So I mean, they'll figure out how to have those animals and things like that.
Well, between that and the debate over, you know, the getting genetics into the herd soon and keeping cows longer because they're more productive, paid off, and, you know, people may switch that. Possible.
I think right now herds are doing pretty well because they are milking older cows.
Yeah,
But
they're going to time out, though.
I think there's a day of reckoning
Yeah,
is coming, and then each operation will make a different decision.
yeah.
I think it'll affect them different.
So Jason, I was curious, you know, your herd that you went back from 3x to 2x, right, and gained some milk. I mean, and this is by no means advocating for that, you know, for herds to really think about that, but I'm curious on, you know, what were the, you know, did they think they were going to lose milk coming in? How surprised, or making that change? Were they surprised? How surprised were they?
Well, I mean, when you make the decision to go to 3X, it's based on an expectation, right? I'm going to get
8% more milk.
Right, exactly. And, you know, intake's going to go up this. My feed efficiency is going to improve. There's all these improvements. But we forget that a 2X mentality management system doesn't work in a 3X system. Like, everything has to improve. And that's where the wheels fall off from my standpoint. But, yeah, they were pretty nervous. But in my mind, it was like, it's just a math problem. Like, there's only 24 hours in a day. They're not getting the right amount of time to do all of those different things. They're breaking all these rules. You know, as soon as they have the time to do it right, it has to pay off. There's no way it can't.
All right, good. Well, what I'd like to do now is, guys, just kind of put a bow on this for the audience, right? Just one or two key takeaway things that you think that, you know, dairy farmers out there need to know, or our fellow nutritionists. I'll start with my co-hosts, Jeffrey.
Our last call question is sponsored by AminoSure XM Precision Release Methionine, the next generation in amino acid balancing. With AminoSure XM, you can save up to 5 cents per cow per day on your methionine investment. Try it today and receive an additional 2.5 cents per cow per day savings with Balchem's limited time rebate offer. Contact your Balchem representative to learn more.
Okay. So one thing I just wrote down, I loved it when you talked about the math. You know, math may be the one thing in this world that doesn't lie. We may interpret it wrong, or it may be interpreted, but math is correct. And then the other thing I wrote down, heard it several times this week, was the subclinical. And I just love the concept of that for this, and the co-infections. And that infection may not be a true bacterial thing. It could be heat stress. It could be whatever that is. But I think we've got to keep those in mind. Sometimes things don't come to light until something else, another stressor. So
Yeah, good comments, Jeff. We'll kick it over to our color commentator over here, Dr. Overton.
Yeah, so Jeff, I hadn't heard the subclinical description before this week either, right? And I think that was a really interesting way to think about that. But I think, you know, one takeaway for herds and their advisors is you know, it's going to be a different situation for every herd a bit. And just because your neighbor's doing something doesn't mean it might work on your farm. And so that's the tricky part, you know, of navigating all this. So.
Yeah, and that's why we got these guys, right, to help them
Exactly.
navigate that and kind of the guide to the forest. So, and with that one, we kick it over to Jason. Jason, you got any comments for us?
Yeah, I mean, I know we didn't really dive, you know, deep into diet formulation or you know, get technical on how to feed, you know, for these different scenarios, because I don't think that's the answer. Just, vaguely, it's, you had mentioned it too, Tom, that we got to be a little bit more conservative, right? And because that, there's going to be an animal that's going to be eating, and there's one behind her waiting. As long as that animal that is behind her is going to eat the same diet as the one that just backed out, sorting, particle size, all of those things matter, moisture content. So we are going to be a little bit more conservative, on the way we feed cows. And I think health is going to be still number one in my mind. But it's going to come down to nutrition management. And I think in scenarios like those, we had an older partner that, said all the time that I'd rather feed a bad diet consistently than a good diet inconsistently. And consistency is going to matter. And it's going to win the day on everything. If we screw it up one time, if vet checks are on Tuesday, well, they're locked up for 3 hours that day. Well, we messed up that day. We broke the rule that day. We're going to pay for it the rest of the week.
So I'm going to interject here again. So either one of you been on a herd, maybe lost that account, but it came back to they weren't making the right changes to get really the improvements they were wanting. You realize maybe it was overcrowding. See what I'm getting at? I'm just...
Since my diets are always perfect, I'd say 100% of the time, and I don't mean that like sarcastic. It usually is about meeting expectations of what they want done, and our failure to communicate what would be some potential correct remedies. So it falls back on us. We've not been able to address it in a manner that's going to get it done.
But it's beyond communication. It's convincing them sometimes.
That's right.
You might communicate it, but can you convince them to make the change?
Yeah. Yep. I think so.
That's the tough part about consulting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody really wants to be held accountable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Got to be part salesman, Jeff. Right? Yeah.
He's figured out how to be a decent one.
Yeah. Well, and I heard Jason.
I don't want to say good.
Part of convincing too, right, is having the right tools, the right data. And you mentioned before that some of the stuff that let's give some credit to Dr. Rick Grant, right? He's giving you some tools to work with. So.
And I just want to make it clear, him saying that I'm decent, not good, but that's a compliment coming from him. So.
Very well. Jim, great conversation. Any final comments for us?
Well, outside of making sure my email address and phone number are prominently displayed in this podcast.
And why don't you're welcome to share it here if you'd like.
I'm not as fancy pants over here. I just went with a Gmail account. Tully640@gmail.com. But all kidding aside, Jason reminded me of this paper it's a dozen years ago. Box paper out of Spain where 18 herds were fed the exact same diet. They did not get the exact same results. I would encourage, and it's a scientific paper, but it is easy to read. I would encourage every dairyman to find that paper and read it. It's revolutionary work. Do you remember what year that would have been published?
Yeah, I think it was early 2000s. I think, but again, the interesting thing there, I mean, they were all these herds were fed the same TMR, made in the same center, so the same forages, same feed, everything was the same, and yet, I think
the non-nutritional factors and
like half of the variance.
I mean, it was like 20 pounds of milk difference.
Yeah.
So if you guys get me that reference, I can put it in the show notes of this.
Yeah, I can get it for you.
Yeah, we'll
Great
do that
paper.
for you. Yeah.
Yep.
Jason, how can people get a hold of you?
So J Hart Livestock Service. I do. I forgot to mention this earlier. Not just dairy consulting, but also feedlots and custom heifer ranches and calf ranches. So my expertise is a little has expanded over the years, and so my email is brixie@jhartls.com.
Okay, very well. Gentlemen, this has been fun.
Yes,
it's been a good
thank
one.
you.
I appreciate you
Appreciate your time.
joining us. Appreciate you guys. Good luck to both of
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jeff, as always, thank you. Good job. Tom, you're a pro. Always
Scott.
are. To our loyal audience out there, thanks again for joining us. Hope you learned something. I hope you had some fun, and I hope to see you next time here at Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'm here to invite you to a very special event at the upcoming ADSA conference in Louisville. It's going to be a bourbon tasting. We're calling it Bourbon and Brainiacs. Now, why do you call it Bourbon and Brainiacs? Because we're going to have all your favorite professors there doing a bourbon tasting. We're going to have 6 to 8 bourbons there. We're going to be recording a podcast and doing the tasting while we're there. We've even got a bourbon barista, which I'm not sure exactly what that is, but we're going to have one of them there. Now listen, this is only for 120 of our favorite friends. That's all this place holds. We're going to have it at the Fraser Museum. It's a bourbon museum there in Louisville, and so only 120 people can fit in there, and so we want you to be one of them. And so to become one of the 120, all you have to do is go to balchem.com/bourbon and register. Once those 120 slots are gone, they're going to be gone, but I hope to see you there.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.